Well, good morning. I want to thank the Premier and the Deputy Premier on behalf of Professor Mary O'Kane and myself for the opportunity to co-lead the flood inquiry to the weather events of 2022. Can I give you an assurance that Mary and I travelled high and low in terms of the inquiry? We held multiple town halls with hundreds of people, particularly those who were affected by the floods. We had virtual town halls with key stakeholders like the mayors across New South Wales. And of course, we had one-on-one interviews with key stakeholders like the commissioners across the emergency services. And all that led us to what we believe are 28 key recommendations. And these aren't recommendations in the weed about low-level issues. Professor O'Kane and I were keen to keep the recommendations down, but look for structural change, look for change in organisation that will drive cultural change, that will make sure that the community of New South Wales is put first. Yes, can I acknowledge the volunteers across New South Wales, of which if we didn't have them, emergency services wouldn't exist. Can I acknowledge particularly the challenges that the SES volunteers faced in the midst of these weather events, and I think that they were themselves let down on many occasions, and that is evidence that we have heard. So from the emergency management perspective, yes, I have made some key recommendations, and that is a permanent CECON. And why? During COVID, we saw times where, as the Commissioner of Police, I was running the Police Force plus COVID. We saw times where retired Deputy Commissioner Gary Warboys was running COVID, plus Regional New South Wales. And from my perspective, it was such a key role. I think it gave enormous confidence in the community that a senior police officer had taken charge. To be clear, there are no additional powers with this role. It is just about identifying how important it is establishing a permanent CECON. They will take on many roles, including making sure that local government and regional areas are trained, exercised, have the appropriate people in place to respond to not just floods, but any emergencies. Yes, there's talk of back-of-house mergers with the SES and the RFS, and that is a key recommendation. And the reason being is the RFS over the last 20 years has grown into a full-time organisation, and they are campaigners, and we've seen what they've done through the bushfires. Their ability to plan and use intelligence is well above even some of the other permanent agencies. To grow that in the SES would take years and years and years. Why wouldn't we merge them and bring together these two agencies where they are working together to protect the people of New South Wales? In saying that, we will continually protect the SES, the brand, that forward-facing. They are so important in terms of protecting the people of New South Wales in storms, floods and tsunamis, and it really allows them to focus on the operational abilities rather than the back-of-house training and those issues that really tie them up in non-essential information. In terms of public messaging, we're seeking changes to that. What we've seen through Services New South Wales is a single point of truth through bushfires and COVID. They would, in theory, take on that role going forward, and under Emma Hogan, they have done an outstanding job over the last couple of years. But overall, these changes are all about protecting the community, putting the community first. Yes, there will be changes in relation to flood rescue, but they will marry up like road rescue, which means who is the closest person with the best skills to rescue you? And I think that has worked well for road rescue and vertical rescue across the state. And I really feel that the State Rescue Board will embrace these changes and change the way that we train, and particularly use the resources that we have for multi-agency rescue. If you look at fire and rescue in Metropolitan Sydney, they sit extremely neatly to take a joint lead with the SES in relation to flood rescue. And then, of course, in regional New South Wales, rural fire would play such an important role as well. Rural fire have 70,000 volunteers, 50,000 active, and they have about 20,000 that can jump on a fire truck at any time. Unfortunately, SES is a much smaller organisation and they have around 200 people who are trained for flood rescue. And in a state of 8 million people, when we see catastrophic weather events, it's just not enough. And it's not the fault of the SES, but trying to build the SES up like the RFS would take 20 years. We don't have time. The RFS has got a very sound commissioner. There are campaigners, and they will take and embrace the back of house merger without devaluing the brand of the SES. I appreciate some volunteers will be disappointed by this, but I truly believe this will start to empower the volunteers at the SES to get better training, to get better capability to protect the people of New South Wales. So they are some of the key emergency management recommendations.